Maya Chen stared at the voicemail on her phone for the third time that morning. The lawyer's voice was crisp and professional, but the words still didn't make sense. Her great-uncle Walter, a man she barely remembered meeting, had died 3 months ago and left her something in his will. She pressed play again. "Miss Chen, this is regarding the estate of Walter Chen. You've inherited a property in Millbrook County, Montana. Please call our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the details." Maya set her phone down on her tiny kitchen counter and rubbed her temples. She was already running late for her morning shift at the coffee shop, and her evening job at the restaurant started right after that. The last thing she needed was another complication in her life. Walter Chen. She tried to remember him from family gatherings, but only faint memories came back. A quiet old man who sat in the corner at her cousin's wedding years ago. Someone who sent Christmas cards with $5 bills tucked inside when she was little. Her grandmother had mentioned once that Walter lived alone somewhere out west. But Maya never paid much attention to family gossip. After her shift at the coffee shop, Maya finally found time to call the lawyer's office. The receptionist put her through to Mr. Davidson, who spoke in the same professional tone as his voicemail. "Miss Chen, your great-uncle has left you 40 acres of land and a cabin in rural Montana. The property has been in your family since the 1950s, and according to his will, it now belongs to you." Maya nearly dropped her phone. "I'm sorry, what, a cabin? I don't understand. Why would he leave it to me? The will doesn't specify his reasoning, but you are listed as the sole beneficiary for this particular asset. I should mention that your cousins were offered their portions of other estate items, but they declined anything related to this property." "They declined? Why would they do that?" Mr. Davidson cleared his throat. "Well, to be frank, Miss Chen, the property requires significant maintenance and carries ongoing tax obligations. The cabin itself is quite old and hasn't been occupied in several years. Many families in similar situations find these rural properties more burdensome than beneficial." Maya felt her stomach drop. She was already struggling to pay her student loans and rent on her one-bedroom apartment. The idea of suddenly being responsible for property taxes on land she'd never seen felt overwhelming. "What happens if I don't want it?" she asked. "You could disclaim the inheritance, in which case it would likely revert to the county for unpaid taxes. Or you could try to sell it, though I should warn you that similar properties in that area have had difficulty finding buyers." Maya thanked the lawyer and hung up, feeling more confused than before. She spent the rest of her shift at the restaurant thinking about it. 40 acres sounded like a lot of land, but if no one wanted to buy it, what good was it? That night she called her cousin David, who had also been mentioned in the will. "Oh, that old place," David said when she brought it up. "Yeah, the lawyer called me too." I told him no thanks. Uncle Walter was always talking about that cabin like it was some kind of treasure, but my dad visited it once and said it was falling apart. Just a money pit in the middle of nowhere. But it's land, right? Doesn't land have value? David laughed. Not that land. It's hours from any decent town. No utilities running to it, and the cabin is probably ready to collapse. Uncle Walter was a nice guy, but he wasn't exactly practical about these things. He lived like a hermit out there for the last 20 years of his life. After talking to David, Maya felt even worse about the situation. She spent the next few weeks trying to ignore the whole thing, but the lawyer kept calling. There were papers to sign, tax documents to review, and deadlines approaching. Finally, she decided to do some research online. She looked up Millbrook County, Montana, and found a rural area with more cows than people. The nearest town had a population of 800. Property listings in the area showed land selling for much less than she'd hoped. Maya tried listing the property with a local real estate agent over the phone. The woman was polite but not encouraging. "Rural properties like that can sit on the market for years," she explained, "especially ones that need work. Most people looking for land in this area want something they can build on right away, with road access and utilities nearby." "What about the cabin? Doesn't that add value?" "Well, that depends on its condition. If it needs major repairs, it might actually hurt the value. Some buyers see old cabins as just another thing they'll have to tear down and haul away." 3 months passed with no serious interest from buyers. Maya received her first property tax bill and nearly fainted. While it wasn't as bad as she'd feared, it was still money she didn't have to spare. She was complaining about the situation to her friend Lisa one evening, when Lisa made a suggestion that changed everything. Why don't you just go see it? I mean, you inherited this place and you've never even looked at it. Maybe it's not as bad as everyone says. Maya had been avoiding that idea because of the expense. A trip to Montana meant taking time off work, paying for gas, and possibly staying overnight somewhere. But as she sat in her cramped apartment, struggling to make ends meet, she realized she was stuck either way. What if I drive out there, see how bad it really is, and then decide what to do? At least then I'd know what I'm dealing with. Lisa nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And hey, maybe it's not as terrible as your cousin thinks. Sometimes family members exaggerate things. Maya spent the next week planning the trip. She requested a few days off from both jobs, something she rarely did. Her supervisors weren't thrilled, but they agreed. She checked her car's tires and oil, mapped out the route, and found a cheap motel about an hour from the property. The night before leaving, Maya sat on her couch looking at the few photos the real estate agent had managed to take from the road. The images were grainy and taken from a distance, but she could make out a small wooden structure surrounded by tall trees. It looked lonely and forgotten. She thought about Uncle Walter living out there by himself all those years. What had he seen in that place? Why had he chosen to leave it to her instead of someone else in the family? Maya folded the property deed and put it in her purse along with the crude map the lawyer had provided. Tomorrow she would finally see what Walter had left her. She just hoped she wouldn't regret making the trip. As she turned off the lights and headed to bed, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this journey was going to change something important. She just wasn't sure if that change would be good or bad. The drive to Montana took longer than Maya had expected. What should have been an 8-hour trip turned into 10, thanks to road construction and her old car's need for frequent stops. By the time she reached the small town of Cedar Falls, the closest settlement to the property, the sun was already setting. She checked into the Pine View Motel, a small place with faded paint and a flickering neon sign. The elderly woman at the front desk was friendly enough, though she seemed curious about why Maya was visiting the area. Not many folks come through here unless they're visiting family, the woman said as she handed over the room key. You got people around here? Something like that, Maya replied, not wanting to explain the whole inheritance situation to a stranger. That night, Maya lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the sounds of the rural Montana evening. It was so quiet compared to her city apartment. No traffic, no neighbors arguing through thin walls, just the occasional call of an owl or rustle of wind through trees. She wondered if Uncle Walter had enjoyed this peace or if it had made him feel lonely. The next morning, Maya grabbed coffee and a breakfast sandwich from the motel's small lobby and studied the map the lawyer had given her. The property was about 20 miles outside of town, down what looked like a series of increasingly smaller roads. The first part of the drive wasn't bad. The main county road was paved and well-maintained, winding through rolling hills covered in tall grass and scattered trees. But when Maya turned onto Timber Creek Road, things changed quickly. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to dirt with deep ruts carved by years of rain and snow. Her small car bounced and rattled over the rough surface. More than once she wondered if she should turn back and forget the whole thing. But something pushed her forward. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the stubborn part of her that had gotten her through college and 2 jobs. After what felt like forever, Maya spotted a rusted mailbox leaning at an odd angle beside the road. The faded numbers matched the address on her paperwork. A narrow path led off into the trees, barely wide enough for her car. She turned onto the path and drove slowly, branches scraping against her windows. The trees grew thicker as she went deeper, blocking out most of the morning sunlight. Just when she was starting to worry about getting stuck, the path opened into a small clearing. Maya stopped the car and just stared. The cabin sat in the middle of the clearing like something from a forgotten time. It was smaller than she'd imagined, maybe the size of a large garage. The wooden walls had weathered to a dull gray, and several of the roof shingles were missing or hanging loose. Tall weeds grew right up to the foundation, and ivy had claimed most of one wall. She got out of the car and walked slowly toward the building. Her first thought was that David had been right. The place looked ready to F. All down. One of the front windows was cracked, and she could see that another window on the side had been boarded up with plywood. But as Maya got closer, she noticed things weren't quite as bad as they'd seemed from a distance. The roof sagged in places, but it wasn't caved in. The walls were weathered, but still standing straight. It was more like a house that had been sleeping for a long time, waiting for someone to wake it up. She walked around the entire cabin, taking pictures with her phone to show the real estate agent later. The back of the property sloped down toward a small creek that she could hear but not quite see through the trees. Despite everything, Maya had to admit there was something peaceful about the place. When she made it back to the front of the cabin, Maya stood before the door and took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. She pulled the key from her purse, the one the lawyer had mailed to her weeks ago. The key slid into the lock easily enough, but when Maya tried to turn it, nothing happened. She jiggled it, tried turning it the other way, and even tried pulling the door toward her while turning the key. Finally, something clicked. Maya pushed on the door and it swung open with a long, loud creak that seemed to echo through the clearing. The sound sent a chill down her spine, though she couldn't say why. It was just an old door on old hinges, but something about that creak felt almost like a warning. The smell hit her first. Dust, dampness, and something else she couldn't identify. Not exactly decay, but the smell of a place that had been closed up too long. Maya fumbled for her phone's flashlight and stepped inside. The interior was bigger than it had looked from outside, but not by much. One main room took up most of the space, with what looked like a small kitchen area along one wall and a stone fireplace on the opposite side. A narrow staircase led up to what was probably a loft bedroom. Dust covered everything. Thick gray dust that made Maya's nose itch and left footprints everywhere she stepped. Old furniture sat under white sheets like ghosts from another time. A small table, a couple of chairs, and what might have been a couch along the back wall. Maya pulled out one of the sheets and coughed as dust flew everywhere. Underneath was a simple wooden chair, handmade by the look of it. She tried to imagine Uncle Walter sitting in that chair, but it was hard to picture anyone actually living in this forgotten place. As she walked around the room, Maya noticed that the floorboards creaked under her feet. That was normal for an old wooden floor, but something seemed off about the sounds. In some places, the creaks were sharp and quick. In others, they were deeper and seemed to last longer. She stopped near the fireplace and shifted her weight from one foot to the other. The sound was definitely different here. Almost hollow, like she was standing over an empty space. Maya knelt down and ran her hands over the floorboards. Most of them were the same weathered wood as the rest of the floor, but this section seemed newer somehow. The wood was a slightly different color, and the boards didn't quite line up with the others. She stood up and walked across the area again, listening carefully. The hollow sound was only in this one spot, maybe 6 feet square, right in front of the fireplace. Maya took pictures of the floor, though she wasn't sure why. Something about the whole thing felt important, even though she couldn't explain what that meant. She spent another hour exploring the cabin, checking the small kitchen area and climbing the creaky stairs to the loft. The upstairs was mostly empty except for an old metal bed frame and a wooden trunk that was locked. Everything was covered in the same thick dust, like the place had been waiting for years for someone to return. When Maya finally stepped back outside, the afternoon sun felt almost blinding after the dim interior of the cabin. She looked back at the building and tried to imagine what it would take to make it livable again. New roof, definitely. The windows would need to be replaced, and the whole place would need a serious cleaning. But as she stood there, Maya realized something had changed during her visit. The cabin didn't feel quite as hopeless as it had when she'd first seen it. There was something about the place, something she couldn't put into words, and that strange hollow sound from the floorboards kept echoing in her mind as she drove back toward town. Maya couldn't stop thinking about that hollow sound. Back in her motel room that evening, she kept replaying the moment when she'd walked across those floorboards near the fireplace. Every time she closed her eyes, she could hear that deep echoing creak that was so different from the rest of the floor. She tried to convince herself it was nothing. Old houses settled in weird ways. Maybe there was just a gap between the floor and the foundation in that spot. But something nagged at her, a feeling she couldn't shake. The next morning, Maya drove back to the cabin earlier than planned. She'd originally intended to spend just one day looking at the property, but now she felt like she needed to understand what she'd heard. She stopped at the hardware store in Cedar Falls and bought a flashlight, some work gloves, and a small crowbar. The clerk, a middle-aged man with grease under his fingernails, looked at her purchases curiously. "Working on an old place?" he asked. "Something like that," Maya replied. "Do you know anything about the Chen property out on Timber Creek Road?" The man's expression changed slightly. Oh, that's Walter's old place. Heard he passed away last year. You family? Great niece. I inherited it, the clerk nodded slowly. Walter was a character. Used to come in here pretty regular, always buying odd things. Tools, survey equipment, maps. Spent a lot of time studying those geological survey maps we keep behind the counter. Maya felt her pulse quicken. Geological surveys? Why would he need those? Never asked directly, but Walter always seemed to think there was something special about that land. Talked about it being worth more than people realized. The clerk shrugged. Of course, lots of old-timers think their property's sitting on buried treasure. Usually doesn't amount to much. Maya thanked him and headed back to the cabin, her mind racing. Uncle Walter had been researching the land. That put a whole different spin on things. When she reached the cabin, Maya went straight to the area near the fireplace. In the daylight streaming through the windows, she could see more clearly that this section of flooring was definitely different. The boards were slightly newer and they'd been fitted into the existing floor, rather than being part of the original construction. Maya put on the work gloves and knelt down with the crowbar. She felt along the edges of the boards until she found a spot where the crowbar would fit. Her heart was pounding as she applied gentle pressure. The first board came up easier than expected, revealing a dark space underneath. Maya grabbed her new flashlight and shined it into the gap. About 3 feet down, she could see what looked like the top of a metal box. Maya worked carefully to remove more floorboards, creating an opening large enough to reach down into the space. The box was heavier than it looked, and she had to use both hands to lift it out. It was made of dark green metal about the size of a small suitcase with a simple latch that opened easily. Inside, everything was wrapped in what looked like old plastic sheeting and cloth. Maya's hands shook as she unwrapped the first bundle. Papers, lots of them. Some looked official, with government letterheads and stamps. Others were handwritten notes in Uncle Walter's careful script. There were maps, diagrams, and photographs of rock formations. Maya spread everything out on the dusty floor and started going through it piece by piece. The first thing that caught her attention was a letter dated just 2 years ago. It was addressed to Walter Chen from something called Mountain West Geological Services. Dear Mr. Chen, it began, thank you for commissioning our survey of your property in Millbrook County. We have completed our analysis of the core samples and are pleased to provide you with our findings. Maya's hands trembled as she read the technical details. Words like rare earth elements, significant deposits, and commercially viable extraction jumped out at her. At the bottom of the letter was a summary that made her gasp. The estimated value of the mineral deposits on the property was in the millions of dollars. Maya sat back on her heels, staring at the letter. This couldn't be real. If the land was worth millions, why hadn't anyone else known about it? Why had her cousins turned down their inheritance so easily? She picked up another document. This one from a different company called Earth Resources International. This letter was even more recent, dated just 6 months before Uncle Walter's death. Mr. Chen, as discussed, we remain very interested in purchasing the mineral rights to your Montana property. Our offer of $2.8 million for a 99-year lease remains open. Please contact us at your earliest convenience to discuss terms. Maya's head spun. $2.8 million for mineral rights alone, not even the whole property. She found more letters from other companies, all making similar offers. Some wanted to buy the land outright. Others wanted long-term leases. The amounts varied, but they were all substantial. Uncle Walter had been sitting on a fortune, but why hadn't he accepted any of the offers? Maya found the answer in Walter's handwritten notes. His writing was small and precise, filling page after page of a composition notebook. These companies don't understand what they're dealing with. One entry read, they want to strip mine the entire area, destroy the ecosystem that's taken decades to recover from the old logging operations. There has to be a better way. Another entry dated a few months later. Researching small-scale extraction methods. If we can remove the valuable materials without destroying the land, everyone wins. Need to find the right partner, someone who cares about more than just profit. Maya realized that Uncle Walter had been trying to find a way to access the mineral wealth without destroying the property. He'd been looking for a company that would work with him to extract the materials responsibly. The final entry in the notebook was written just a few weeks before his death. Maya seems like a smart girl. Talked to her briefly at David's wedding. She cares about the environment, works hard, has good values. If something happens to me, maybe she'll know what to do with this place. The land is worth fighting for. Maya felt tears sting her eyes. Uncle Walter had been thinking about her, planning for her to inherit this responsibility. He'd trusted her with something he'd spent years protecting. She kept digging through the papers and found copies of all the geological surveys, detailed maps showing exactly where the valuable minerals were located, and even some research into environmentally friendly extraction methods. But then she found something that made her blood run cold. It was a letter from a law firm, dated just a month ago. Long after Uncle Walter's death. Dear Estate Representative, it began. Our client, Titan Mining Corporation, has become aware of certain mineral rights associated with the Chen property in Millbrook County. We believe there may have been irregularities in the transfer of these rights and wish to contest the current ownership status. Maya read the letter 3 times before the full meaning sank in. Someone was challenging her inheritance. They wanted to claim that she didn't actually own the mineral rights to the property. The letter was signed by Morrison, Pearson Associates, and it mentioned that they'd been in contact with certain family members about the situation. Maya's heart sank as she realized what this meant. While she'd been struggling to figure out what to do with a property she thought was worthless, someone else had been working behind the scenes to take it away from her. She gathered up all the papers and packed them carefully back into the metal box. Her hands were shaking, but not from excitement anymore. She was scared. Uncle Walter had left her something incredible, but he'd also left her in the middle of a fight she didn't understand. Companies wanted to pay millions for this land, but they also wanted to destroy it, and now it seemed like someone was trying to steal it from her entirely. Maya looked around the dusty cabin one more time before heading back to her car. The place felt different now that she knew its secret. It wasn't just an old building in the middle of nowhere. It was the center of something much bigger, something that people were willing to fight over. As she drove back toward town, Maya realized her simple trip to see an unwanted inheritance had turned into something else entirely. She was now sitting on a potential fortune, but she had no idea who she could trust or what she should do next. The only thing she knew for certain was that her life had just become a lot more complicated. Maya drove straight back to her motel, her mind spinning with everything she'd discovered. She spread all the documents across her small room's table and desk, trying to make sense of the timeline. Uncle Walter had known about the mineral deposits for at least 2 years, maybe longer. He'd been getting offers from multiple companies, but he'd turned them all down. Now, just months after his death, someone was trying to challenge her ownership of the very thing that made the property valuable. Maya picked up her phone and called Mr. Davidson, the lawyer who'd handled Uncle Walter's estate. It went straight to voicemail. She left a message asking him to call her back immediately, then sat staring at the legal letter from Titan Mining Corporation. Something about the timing bothered her. How had this mining company learned about the mineral deposits so quickly after Walter's death? The geological surveys were supposed to be private, kept in Walter's personal files, yet somehow Titan Mining knew exactly what was under the ground. Her phone rang, startling her out of her thoughts. The caller ID showed Mr. Davidson's office. Miss Chen, I got your message. I hope everything is going well with your property inspection. Maya took a deep breath. Actually, I need to ask you about something. I found some documents at the cabin that suggest the property might be more valuable than we discussed. There are geological surveys showing mineral deposits. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I see, Mr. Davidson said finally. His voice sounded different somehow, more careful. Where exactly did you find these documents? Hidden under the floorboards. Uncle Walter had been getting offers from mining companies. Big offers. Why didn't you mention any of this when we talked about the inheritance? Another pause. Miss Chen, I handled your uncle's basic estate matters, but I wasn't privy to all of his business dealings. If he chose not to share certain information with me, there was nothing I could do about that. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. But you would have known if companies were making offers on the property, right? That would be part of settling his estate. Not necessarily. If your uncle chose to decline those offers without formal documentation, I might not have been aware of them. Maya looked down at the pile of letters from various mining companies. There were at least a dozen, all formal offers with specific dollar amounts. It would have been impossible for the lawyer handling Walter's estate not to know about them. Mr. Davidson, I also found a letter from Titan Mining Corporation. They're claiming there might be irregularities in the transfer of mineral rights. Do you know anything about that? The silence on the phone lasted so long that Maya wondered if the call had dropped. Miss Chen, Davidson said finally, I think it would be best if we discuss this in person. There may be some complications with your inheritance that require immediate attention. What kind of complications? The kind that are best handled quickly and quietly. I'd recommend returning to the city as soon as possible so we can sort this out properly. Maya felt her stomach drop. Are you saying my inheritance isn't valid? I'm saying that when valuable mineral rights are involved, things can get complicated very quickly. The last thing you want is to get caught up in a lengthy legal battle that could cost you everything. After Maya hung up, she sat in her motel room feeling sick. The lawyer's tone had completely changed once she mentioned the mineral deposits. Instead of being helpful, he seemed to be pushing her to give up the property quickly. She thought about the letter from Titan Mining, specifically the part about being in contact with certain family members. Maya picked up her phone and called her cousin David. Maya. How's the cabin? As bad as I thought? David, I need to ask you something. Have you been contacted by any mining companies about Uncle Walter's property? David was quiet for a moment. Why would you ask that? Just answer the question. Has anyone contacted you? Look, Maya, some lawyer called me a few weeks ago asking about the inheritance. Said there might be some issues with how the property was transferred. I told him I wasn't interested in getting involved. Maya's heart sank. What was the lawyer's name? I don't remember exactly. Morrison something. He said if there were problems with your inheritance, the property might get tied up in court for years. Honestly, I was glad I'd already turned down my part. Maya looked down at the letter in her hands. Morrison, Pierce & Associates, the same law firm representing Titan Mining. David, did this lawyer suggest that you might be entitled to part of the mineral rights even though you declined the property? How did you know that? David's voice sounded defensive now. He said the will might not have properly addressed the mineral rights separately from the land itself. That maybe Uncle Walter didn't have the right to give those away without involving the whole family. Maya felt betrayed and angry. And you didn't think to call me about this? I didn't want to get in the middle of it. The guy said you'd probably be better off selling to his client anyway. That fighting it would just cost you money you don't have. After hanging up on David, Maya realized she was completely alone in this fight. Her own family had been contacted by the opposition. Her lawyer seemed unreliable, and she was hundreds of miles from home trying to figure out what to do. She spent the rest of the evening researching Titan Mining Corporation online. What she found made her even more worried. The company had a history of aggressive land acquisition tactics. They'd been involved in several legal disputes with property owners, and they usually won. Maya also found news articles about their mining operations. The environmental damage was exactly what Uncle Walter had been afraid of. Strip mining polluted water supplies and destroyed ecosystems. But the most disturbing thing she discovered was a business news article from just 3 months ago. Titan Mining had recently hired a new, legal team specifically to handle complex inheritance and mineral rights cases. The article mentioned that the company was expanding into new regions and expected to acquire several new properties through strategic legal challenges. Maya realized she wasn't just dealing with a company that wanted to buy her land. She was dealing with a company that specialized in taking land away from people who inherited it. The next morning, Maya's phone rang early. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Miss Chen, this is Robert Torres from Titan Mining Corporation. I understand you've recently inherited some property that might be of interest to us. Maya's blood ran cold. How did you get this number? Miss Chen, I'd like to make you an offer that could solve all your problems. We're prepared to purchase your property for $1.2 million cash with closing in 30 days. No legal complications, no lengthy processes. That's less than half what the geological surveys say it's worth. Torres chuckled. Miss Chen, those surveys assume perfect conditions and no legal challenges. Given the current situation with your inheritance, I think you'll find our offer quite generous. What situation with my inheritance? Surely your lawyer has explained the complexities. Mineral rights cases can drag on for years, especially when there are questions about proper family notification during the probate process. By the time you pay legal fees and court costs, you might end up with nothing. Maya realized that Torres knew exactly what was happening with her case. He knew about the family contacts, the legal challenges, everything. I'm not interested in selling, she said firmly. Miss Chen, I'd encourage you to reconsider. These matters have a way of becoming very expensive very quickly. We're offering you a clean exit with significant money in your pocket. I'd hate to see you lose everything because you were too stubborn to accept a reasonable offer." The threat in his voice was clear. Maya hung up without another word. She looked around her small motel room at all the documents spread across every surface. Uncle Walter had trusted her with this responsibility, but she was starting to understand why he'd spent years trying to find the right solution. The forces lined up against her seemed overwhelming, but Maya also realized something else. If they were trying this hard to pressure her into selling, the property must be worth even more than the surveys indicated, and that meant she had something worth fighting for. Maya spent that night in her motel room making phone calls and doing research. She wasn't going to let Titan Mining Corporation intimidate her into giving up something Uncle Walter had spent years protecting. Her first call was to a different lawyer, one she found through an online search for attorneys who specialized in mineral rights cases. The lawyer Jennifer Walsh agreed to speak with her the next morning. "Miss Chen," Walsh said during their phone call, "what you're describing sounds like a coordinated effort to pressure you into selling below market value. It's unfortunately common when individual property owners discover valuable mineral deposits." Maya felt relieved to finally talk to someone who seemed to be on her side. "What can I do about it?" "First, we need to verify that your inheritance is completely legal and properly documented. Then we need to understand exactly what Titan Mining's claim is based on. Most importantly, we need to move quickly before they can tie things up in court with frivolous challenges." Walsh recommended that Maya gather all of Uncle Walter's documents and meet with her in person as soon as possible. Maya agreed to drive back to the city the next day. But before leaving Montana, Maya wanted to visit the cabin one more time. She felt like she needed to say goodbye to Uncle Walter, to let him know she understood what he'd been trying to protect. When she arrived at the property that afternoon, Maya was surprised to see another car parked in the clearing. A man in an expensive suit was walking around the cabin taking pictures and making notes. "Excuse me," Maya called out as she got out of her car. "This is private property." The man turned around with a fake smile. "You must be Miss Chen. I'm Robert Torres from Titan Mining. I thought I'd take a look at the property while I was in the area." Maya's anger flared. "You're trespassing. I want you to leave immediately." Torres held up his hands in mock surrender. "No need to get upset. I was just trying to understand what we're dealing with here." He gestured toward the cabin. "Honestly, Miss Chen, I'm not sure why you're so attached to this place. It's going to take a fortune just to make it livable. That's not your concern." Torres walked closer to Maya, his friendly mask slipping. "Actually, it is my concern. See, we've done some additional research since we last spoke. It turns out your Uncle Walter may not have had clear title to the mineral rights when he died. There are some old liens on the property that could complicate your ownership." Maya's heart skipped a beat, but she tried not to show her fear. "I don't believe you. Believe what you want. But I'd strongly advise you to take our offer before this gets messy. Once we file our legal challenge, this property will be tied up for years. You won't be able to sell it to anyone else, and you'll still be responsible for the taxes and maintenance." After Torres left, Maya sat on the cabin's front steps and tried to calm down. She pulled out her phone and called Jennifer Walsh again. "He's lying, isn't he?" Maya asked after explaining what Torres had said. "Probably, but we'll need to verify everything. These companies often make claims about title problems to scare property owners. Don't let him pressure you into making any quick decisions." That evening, Maya made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of driving straight back to the city, she checked into the motel for one more night. She wanted time to think clearly about what Uncle Walter would have wanted her to do. She spread out all of his research notes and read through them again. One passage stood out to her. "The land is worth more than just the minerals underneath it. This ecosystem took decades to recover from the old logging. If we can find a way to extract value without destroying the environment, we create something sustainable for future generations." Maya realized that Uncle Walter hadn't just been trying to protect the land from mining companies. He'd been trying to find a way to use the mineral wealth to fund long-term conservation efforts. The next morning, Maya called a number she'd found in Uncle Walter's notes. It was for Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a geology professor at the state university who had consulted on the mineral surveys. Walter was passionate about finding sustainable solutions. Dr. Hoffman told Maya, "He'd been working with us to develop a research proposal for selective extraction methods. The idea was to remove only the most valuable materials using minimal environmental impact techniques. Is that actually possible? It's cutting-edge technology, but yes. We were hoping to use Walter's property as a pilot project. The mineral deposits there are perfect for testing new extraction methods. If successful, it could revolutionize how we approach mining in environmentally sensitive areas. Maya felt a spark of excitement. What would something like that involve? Well, we'd need funding for the research, probably around $2 million over 5 years. In exchange, the university would share any profits from the extracted materials with the landowner. More importantly, the land itself would remain largely untouched. Maya spent the rest of the day thinking about Dr. Hoffman's proposal. It seemed like exactly what Uncle Walter had been looking for. A way to access the mineral wealth without destroying what he'd spent years protecting. When she finally returned to the city, Maya met with Jennifer Walsh and laid out everything she'd learned. Walsh confirmed that Maya's inheritance was completely legal, and that Titan Mining's claims were baseless intimidation tactics. The question is, Walsh said, what do you want to do now? You could sell to a mining company for quick money, fight to keep the land as is, or explore this university partnership. Maya thought about her tiny apartment, her 2 jobs, and her student loan debt. The easy answer would be to take Titan Mining's money and walk away. But she also thought about Uncle Walter living alone in that cabin for 20 years, protecting something he believed was important. I want to work with the university, Maya said finally. Uncle Walter trusted me with this for a reason. 6 months later, Maya stood in the restored cabin watching Dr. Hoffman's research team set up their equipment. The university partnership had provided enough funding, not only for the research project, but also for Maya to quit her jobs in the city and move to Montana full-time. She'd used part of the money to fix up the cabin, turning it into a comfortable home and research station. The front door still creaked when the wind blew, but now it sounded welcoming rather than ominous. Titan Mining had eventually given up their legal challenges when it became clear that Maya had strong legal representation and community support. Dr. Hoffman's project had attracted attention from environmental groups and other universities, creating a network of allies that the mining company couldn't easily intimidate. Maya had also established the Walter Chen Conservation Trust, using the university's initial payment to purchase additional land around the property. The trust would ensure that the area remained protected regardless of what happened with the mining research. As she watched the sunset through the cabin's new windows, Maya thought about how much her life had changed since that first phone call from Mr. Davidson. She'd gone from viewing the inheritance as a burden to understanding it as a gift, not just the financial value, but the chance to continue Uncle Walter's work, protecting something bigger than herself. The old cabin, that had seemed worthless, was now the center of groundbreaking research that could change how the world approached mining and conservation. And Maya had